Are you ready to have a little fun this morning? Anybody? Great. That feels great. I just got done. Lydia ran her first half marathon today. And so if we could put our hands together to all who finished their full marathon. I know some runners are still coming in. It's so much fun to run with her and to be a part of that. And so I'm half delirious and I'm half excited to be here with you and to continue the series that we're in the middle of. You have a life change story, and your story is worth telling. It's worth it. The challenge is we assume that in order for this story to be worth it, it has to be big. It has to be like full of big things. We have to see it here, and when you can't see it here, like up on the screen, you don't see it really anywhere, which means you're missing it here and here. This is why we want you to write out your story. In part so that, yes, we can celebrate it with you, so that we can see what God's been doing in your life, so that you can share it with your friends. But I think what you don't realize is part of the reason we want you to write your story is so that you can see the story that God is writing, so that you can begin to identify the adventure that many of you have already been on, the story that God is writing in you and through you, the adventure of you. The challenge is we live in our stories so much that we can't really see it, and we start to undervalue it. The number of people who've emailed me and said, you know, Ben, I didn't really think I had a life change story until I sat down and started reflecting on how I got to where I'm at today. Karen, who attends at our South Toledo campus, I've known her for years, was one of the youth leaders when her kids were attending our youth ministry, our student ministry. And she just said, I look back and I see some of the highs and lows and how God has used all of that to get me where I'm at today. I want you to write your story. And so if you need prompts for that or whatever, go to cedarcreek.tv/mystory. Go on our app and click on the button. And at the very least, take a few minutes to reflect on how you got to where you're at today. You know what you're going to see? You're going to see where God was at work in these ingredients of a great adventure. If you go back, if you need prompts, when was the uncovering for you? And we go through a series of these, right? Where something that had been there all along, we get fresh perspective of. Or maybe challenging seasons. We hate these. Nobody's like, yes, more challenge, please. But the truth is, it's through them. Like no great movie, no great story that captures your attention doesn't have challenges. Well, okay, maybe like Disney with Friends, you know, like the little kids shows. That's like, there's no challenge there. It's all smiles and that's why adults find it boring. Well, most adults, right? Clarifying, there's a clarifying stage where you get focused in on something, and then ultimately the achieving stage. We think this is the only thing that adventure is, but it really involves all of them, and you experience them in every season. You can go back and look at your childhood, and there were defining moments, clarifying moments, challenging moments, uncovering moments where somebody saw something in you that you didn't see in you. You can do it in your teens, in your 20s, when you were at college, when you just got married, when you started your job, when kids showed up on the scene, when kids left the house. Every season is like an episode in the adventure of you. It's like a chapter of the book, The Adventure of You. And what chapter are you in right now? Don't just think season. Think ingredients. Like what's going on in your world? Which of these things, one or two of these, is God uncovering something in your life? If you're online, type in the chat, which of these things? If you want, kind of whisper to the person next to you. Are you experiencing challenge right now? Is there a challenging season that you're in the middle of? Is there some clarifying that God is doing in your life? Is there some achieving where you're seeing God show up and you're moving forward in ways? Or does your life resemble a little bit of something like this, where maybe you feel like you've been stuck for a long time, and somebody comes along because you want out of the mess, and suddenly they pull you out and you're free. It's just like, yes, I can live my life. That didn't take long. How many of you can relate to that? Come on. That's right. Me too, okay? Just like when I thought I had it all together, right back where I started, wherever you are in your journey. Whatever you're experiencing, that just got real for some of you. I can see that. That's great. I told you we were going to have some fun today. I'm really glad that you're here. I want to welcome each of our campuses that are joining us. If you're here for the first time or tuning in online or on TV, my name's Ben, and I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here. We have men who watch at Toledo Correctional, and one of the things I love for those of us that are physically here to do is just to create a connection with those who are watching on the screen, to tell them we love them. So you put your hands together to let those watching out there that we see them, we love them. It's great to be a part of this together. Every adventure story that you love, every movie that you love, and really, we don't always love the elements, but it has all of these ingredients, not just the fun parts. And if you think of your favorite adventure movie, that you could go back and watch adventure movies, and they have all of these stages in the movie. And you know, last week we talked about the challenge. Do you know how most of the time they get through the challenges? Most of the time, they don't just quit and walk away. That'd be a pretty boring movie, you know, like, hey, Darth Vader and the end of the Empire, or, all of this stuff. All right, I quit. We all quit. Fold it up. Let them take over. End of the movie. Roll credits. It's like, we wouldn't watch that. No. The way that people navigate the challenging seasons is they go through them. And as they go through, like, how do you get out of the challenge? You experience a clarifying phase. It's the clarifying ingredient. It's a defining moment. This is the heart part of the movie where you get all of the feels. It's like, oh man, we're gonna try to keep it together. It's like you feel the passion. You connect with the moment in a personal way. If you think about, I've been reliving my childhood a bit through talking about the Goonies every week. And so if you've never seen the Goonies are a group of friends that grew up in a similar neighborhood, and they go on little adventures together, and all of the Goonies find out that their parents are going to have to get rid of their homes because the country club wants to buy them all up, and they can't raise enough money to buy off the country club. And so they're all dealing with all of this, and while they're processing it, they find a treasure map up in Mikey's dad's attic, and they decide to go on one final adventure together. Let's just see if the treasure is real. And once they start, they're skipping and having a great time, and then they encounter the Fratellis, and they almost lose their life. And then they find the cave that leads to the potential treasure, and there's all sorts of traps and challenges, right? They run into Chester Copperpot, and they push past him, and finally they get to this waterfall where there's this treasure everywhere. They're like, we found it. And what they discovered is it's the wishing well. It's the wishing well that's a part of their town where people would throw pennies and quarters and all of that stuff in. And while they're there, a friend up on top realizes that there's voices, and they finally have a way out of this predicament that they found themselves in. That it's been challenging. They've almost died a couple of times, and they have this moment where in the middle of this, Mikey is like, hey, don't you realize that the next time you see Sky, it'll be over another town? Like the next time you take a test, it'll be in some other school. Like our parents up there, they're doing the best for us. And up there, that's their time right now. But down here, this is our time. It's our time down here. And that's all over the moment you ride up Troy's bucket. It's like some of you watch a movie, you're feeling it, aren't you? It's like you're right there. There's this clarifying moment where they have to make a choice. How are they going to move forward? It's a bottom line, really. We're going to have to find ourselves in seasons where you have to realize that a purpose-filled no creates space for an impactful yes. Every choice you make today creates the challenges you face tomorrow. We talked about that last week. That means every yes you give is giving a no to a whole lot of other things that you may or may not be thinking about. And there are times where we need to say no purposefully in order to fully give ourselves to a more important yes. There are other times where no's are said for us that we really didn't have any control over. And how are we going to navigate that? Are we going to trust that maybe God's leading us to a more impactful yes? But I need to be clear, this is not just about generally saying no more to people in your life. Why? Because an excuse-filled no leaves behind an adventurous next step. If you think about clarifying your purpose, it's really easy to give an excuse-filled no. Oh man, I'll put that off next month, next week. I don't really feel like it right now. And so when I say you need to sharpen your no, which is the title for this talk, I'm talking about clarifying your purpose. I'm talking about sharpening your purpose-filled no so that you can say yes to what really matters. The Bible is full of people who found themselves in these clarifying stages, these challenges where they have an opportunity to pick a path that's going to clarify the next step. And the way that they get through that is by clarifying what's really most important. And every week we've been focusing on a little different story throughout the Bible. And this week I want to look at two people that had to sharpen their no in order to be available for an impactful yes. And I want to look at how God clarified their calling in the midst of it. To help set it up, this is all of the writings that are a part of the New Testament. Now, if you're not that familiar with the Bible, the Old Testament you could call the Jewish scriptures. It's before Jesus. The New Testament are all of the writings around Jesus' life in the first century church. These are letters that were written to the first century church. A lot of people think of the Bible as one book, when in reality it's a collection of 66 different writings with different authors, with different purpose. And so in the New Testament, these are all of the writings. And the one guy we're going to look at, known as the Apostle Paul, I know many of you have heard of him before. Here's the amount of the New Testament that he wrote. Like almost 2/3 of it. Aside from Jesus, many argue that he's the most influential voice in the movement of the church aside from Jesus himself. He started 14 churches. He raised up a bunch of leaders. He is the primary leader who started churches outside of Jerusalem. And I want to take you to where his story begins. It's in Acts chapter 9. I would encourage you to read it for yourself. You're going to see all of the elements of all of the ingredients of an adventure in his life. He says, meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. Yeah, that's right. Saul was his name before it was changed to Paul. And every breath was eager to, what's that word? Kill. Not like, eliminate. He's like the Liam Neeson of the first century. I don't know who you are and I don't have a lot of money, but what I do have is a very particular set of skills. I will find you. I will kill you. Right? I mean, the next verse says he requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the way that he found there. The way was a first century term for followers of Jesus. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. Believe it or not, this is the same guy who writes the majority of the Christian scriptures. If you were to show up and you were to ask Saul or anyone around at that time, hey, you're going to convert more people than you're going to kill. You're going to convert more people than you're going to bring back in chains. You'd have been like, you're dumb. There's no way. That's not happening. In fact, most people in the church saw him as a threat. Like they were praying Saul away. He's a problem. Maybe you're looking at your life today and you think you're a problem. God could never use someone like me. What I love about the Bible is it's full of people who seem the most unlikely that God would use. So you'd be wrong. You are a part of the story that he's writing today. Maybe you have a boss or somebody in your neighborhood, or there's a leader out there, or a politician, or a movement that you just think is a threat to the church. Maybe. But what you may be missing is the story that God may be writing. We want to see the end of the story. Right now, Saul's a problem. And the very first ingredient, the very first part of the adventure is what happens next. As he was approaching Damascus on his mission, on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him, and he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Have you ever heard a voice from heaven? I'll be honest, I've never heard a voice from heaven. That is... when I open up my Chick-fil-A bag, I do hear, this is my chicken in whom I am well pleased, okay? It's amazing. It's like, oh, God's chicken. But I do believe that God speaks today. I believe his voice is active. And that may seem weird to some of you, but the primary place where God speaks is through his word. We call it the Bible. It's not just a history book. It is a living document that when you open it and you begin to understand it and you approach it with an open heart, I believe that God speaks. This is why we want you to read the Living It Out and get comfortable reading the Bible for yourself. So that you can, it says that the Bible will expose our innermost thoughts and desires. It's powerful. Another way that God speaks is through other Jesus followers. Like right now, you're tuning in, you're sitting here. And I believe that between my mouth and your ears, God's Spirit shows up and uses this space with the passages that we're talking about to encourage, to challenge, to correct some of you when your heart is open. I think another way that God speaks is through his Spirit in our soul. We call it like a prompt, or people will say, man, I feel like God is telling me, or he said to me. But we've got to be careful with that, because sometimes it's just the whispers of your heart. And so I encourage people when they sense God is telling them to do something, to confirm it with the Bible and with other Jesus followers. No matter how he is speaking, God typically is inviting us to take a step of trust, to go where he's inviting us to go, or to say an excuse-filled no. Here's how Saul replies. He says, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice replied, "I am Jesus," not just God. "I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Saul's first response has to be, this can't be right. I had something in the burrito last night. It's not working, okay? I mean, he grew up going to church. Synagogue is what they would have called it. He went to the top religious school. He was one of the top students. He is honored and celebrated and respected by all of the Jewish religious leaders. He was trained to know God, and he believed that Jesus was a threat. And now Jesus is telling Saul that he's the problem? This would be challenging. Now, I know some of you grew up in church. And you're like, I can't think of a time where I didn't know about God, or I didn't believe that God existed. And you might not be fighting Christians, but there may be a sense where you're resisting the whisper, the purpose that God has for you, in a similar way that Paul couldn't see it. And so what did Jesus do? He's like, hey, take a pause. It's time to clarify a few things. Saul picked himself up off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he was blind. And so his companions had to lead him by hand to Damascus. He remained there blind for 3 days and didn't eat or drink. God blinds him and then tells him to go and wait. I know 3 days probably doesn't feel like a long time to you or me, but when you don't know when you're going to get instruction, it probably feels like forever. When you can't see, when your plans change, it's like, whoa, this feels like an eternity. Have you ever asked, like, why did God blind him? I was thinking about that this week. It's like, he took his sight. See, I think God took his sight to help Saul clarify his calling. Saul, I have big plans for you. I have an adventure for your life. But you've been saying yes to your vision. And so I think God brought a purpose-filled no. A purpose-filled no to create space for Saul to step into a more impactful yes. And I think sometimes God does that with you and me. He's trying to give him spiritual vision. In Proverbs it says, if people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves, because all you have is your vision. But when they attend to what he reveals, they are most blessed. So let me just ask an obvious question. How do you experience God's blessing in your life? It's when you attend to what he reveals. It's when you allow him to clarify. And how do you experience stumbling all over yourselves? When you do it your way, my way. Perhaps the reason you feel like life is stumbling is because you just can't see what God is doing. Maybe you've been giving him an excuse-filled no, and you've missed the adventurous next step that he has for you. Maybe God brought a no to you, where he's trying to reveal, he's trying to clarify, he's trying to allow his purpose for your life to bring a purpose-filled no so that you'll stop and step into God's calling for you. If we're going to sharpen our no, then we need space where we are clarifying our calling. A calling is like a strong urge towards something, not just a phone call, right? It's when you feel drawn towards something. And I believe that God has a calling for all of you. You'll often hear people like, oh, I got called into the ministry. We think it's for pastors. But the truth is, another way to say that is that calling is like the same word as purpose. God has a purpose for your life. And we tend to think of sometimes like in a general sense, like, oh yeah, I know God has a couple things for me to do. But it's not very clear. We haven't clarified it. We just know it's out there orbiting our life somewhere. Or we tend to think that our calling is maybe the very specific job that we're doing. I'm a teacher. I'm an electrician. I work in sales at such and such company. I'm a manager of whatever. I'm an educator. Whatever that thing is, we think that's our calling. And our calling may be a part of that. But here's a different way to think about a calling. It's like a compass. It always tells you where north is so that you don't get lost. But it doesn't always tell you the exact next step to take. It doesn't always determine the place or the season or the terrain. It's just meant to help you stay the course no matter what your job, no matter what your season is. This is why Growth Track is so important to us. It's not just a thing that we do here at church. In Growth Track, we take 3 different circles and we talk about how your purpose is the convergence of all 3 of those. It's the convergence of your place, where you are today. It's also your personality, how you're wired, which involves your past experiences, how you got to where you're at today. It also involves your passion, what really matters to you. And when you begin to get clarity on this, wow. Suddenly, no matter where you work, you know a little bit of how God's wired you to show up there. No matter what you do, no matter where life takes you, you've got a compass. And so if you haven't taken Growth Track, I would love for you to join us. That may mean you have to physically kind of attend with us. And I know many of you watching at home, you're vaccinated, you feel great. It's, come, experience it in the room. It's even better. It's like, I know it's convenient at home too, and I'm glad we can offer that. But man, be a part of that. Get connected to your purpose. And here's what's powerful. Here's what's fun. Each purpose is unique. You are one of a kind. That means from God's perspective, the story that he's writing, he has gifted you with a purpose that only you can do. And so when you don't show up, a whole lot of people miss out on what God may want to do in their life. But when you do, it helps you come alive and other people experience it. And you know what's great? Even though all of our purpose is unique, we are all working together on the same mission. And so we're unified as like a life-giving family, a movement of people in what Jesus called what the Bible calls the Great Commission, to go and make disciples of all nations. You know what it means to be a disciple? It's to be a person who develops other people. We are creating a movement of people who are developing other people through their giftedness. 1 Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, wrote this to the first century church. He said, God has given each of you, not some of you, each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. He's given you a gift. Now use it for more than just you. This is how God wired you to make an impact. And so instead of giving an excuse-filled no, which will cause you to miss out on impactful opportunities, you need to clarify. You need to clarify your calling. That's what I mean by sharpen your no. Take some time. The goal is to get it down to one sentence. It's not the perfect sentence. It's to put it to words. I'm telling you, it's harder than you think. But when you start to narrow it down to one sentence, I have found it so helpful to have a clear statement. The ways that you can get there is as you write out or reflect on your story, think about your passion and your dreams and the different ingredients of the adventure and how you got to where you're at today. And I think what you'll see is a through line where it's like, this has been consistent day in and day out. This has been a consistent part of my life. I've spent years working on this, right? And recently, I reworked my own calling statement with some friends. Basically, my calling is to inspire and equip people to become aware and unafraid of the dream that God has for them. Ben, you're not talking about teaching the Bible. That's part of it. And that's part of how I inspire and equip people to become aware and unafraid of the dream that God has for them. What's great about that calling is it doesn't just talk about what I do at work. It talks about how I want to parent at home. It talks about what kind of neighbor I want to be in my neighborhood. It talks about what kind of friend I want to be to my friends. God has wired me to inspire people and to equip them. to help them see, to get spiritual vision, and to be unafraid that God has a purpose for your life. See, when you have that, it helps me focus on God's yes for my life, and it sharpens, it gives clarity on where I have permission to say no. Because I'm not going to be able to do all things perfect and well. I'm not going to write a series of deep intellectual commentaries. That's probably not the way that God's wired me. It may change in the next 20 years. And so instead of feeling guilty that I can't do that, I'm going to step into the yes, which means if you're going to sharpen your no, you probably need to start a to-don't list. That's right, to don't. It works for me, right? What are the things that you're doing today that you need to don't do anymore? Because culture is saying there are a few things that are really important, and they're keeping you from stepping into God's yes for your life. Comfort. Oh, man, it's going to be a lot of work. Comfort says a lot of things that are important. It's keeping you from God's adventure of you. Comparison. Well, look at what they have. You got to keep up with them. Man, don't want to bring the neighborhood down. Don't want to, be the one guy on the team. Comparison says a whole lot of things. What are the things you need to stop doing? Not so that you just do less, but so that you say yes to God's call. To learn how to listen and follow God's voice in your life. This is the process that God started with Saul while he was in Damascus, while he was blind, while he was waiting, while he was wondering and a little bit confused as to what all of this meant and what was his future going to be. While he was waiting, this is the process that God started, and maybe God's doing that in your life. And in the meantime, what Saul may not have realized is that there was a man, a believer in Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord spoke to him in a vision, calling, "Ananias!" And "Yes, Lord," he replied. Now here's what's interesting. We'll go to the next slide here. The Lord said, "Go over to Straight Street to the house of Judas. When you get there, ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. He is praying to me right now." Do you notice the difference? With Saul, he took his sight so that Saul could get spiritual vision. And with Ananias, a believer, he gave him vision. He clarified his calling. He invited him to take a next step. He said, "Go see Saul from Tarsus." And here was Ananias' response. He's like, "But Lord, excuse me, I've heard many people talk about the terrible things this dude has done to believers in Jerusalem." That's what the Greek translation of that word is right there. It's dude, okay? "And he's authorized by the leading priest to arrest anyone who calls upon your name." I mean, this request, God, doesn't really make sense. It's a little risky. If you wanted to eliminate me, just take me now, God. I don't really want to have to go back. You know what I mean? It's like, this doesn't feel very comfortable. This doesn't make sense to me. It might cost Ananias his future. Do you know what he's doing? He's beginning the process of a bunch of excuse-filled no's. And they're rational, they're logical. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but are you more committed to your comfort than to God's purpose for your life? Because it's easy to get there. It's really easy to ask God to bless our plans instead of saying yes to his call, his purpose. Do you know what I love about God? Is he doesn't get like, "Ananias, I'm so disappointed in you. You know what? You screwed up. Because of all of your doubts and questions, I'm going to pick somebody else." No, he doesn't get upset. He simply clarifies his calling. The Lord said, "Go, for Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to the kings, as well as to the people of Israel, and I will show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake." God is clarifying Ananias' calling here, which for Ananias was an invitation for him to sharpen his no against fear. It was an invitation for Ananias to sharpen his no against comfort, against control, and instead to trust God and step into a more impactful yes. See, I don't think Ananias fully understood that he was going to talk to the guy who may be the most influential voice in the church aside from Jesus himself. He doesn't know that. It's the only time that I can see that he's mentioned in the New Testament. And he's playing a key role in the future of the church. Imagine if he would have said, no, man, I'm not feeling it today. See, I know some of you probably sit there and you go, I'll never be an Apostle Paul. And you may be right. But sometimes we underestimate the stories like Ananias. See, your significant, your greatest accomplishment, as Andy Stanley likes to say, may not be what you do. It may be who you influence or who you raise. When Ananias shows up and prays for Paul, it says that scales fell from his eyes. And after that, Saul was baptized. Conversion and then baptism. We have baptisms coming up at the beginning of May. Maybe that's the next step that you need to take. What Ananias did in those moments is, with his words, he clarified for Saul what Saul's mission was. He helped Saul see God's best yes for his life. And let's just look at that. The first thing that he says, you're going to take my message. You're going to go from killing Christians to participating with me and converting them. More than you could ever imagine. You're going to go, instead of being against my message, you're going to go to the world with my message. Think about that change. The second thing is you're going to take my message to the Gentiles. Saul, you've spent your life hating non-Jewish people, despising them, and now you're going to have dinner with them. You're going to go into a culture that's different than yours, and you're going to learn to love these people that you've spent most of your life avoiding. You know what, Saul? You've spent most of your life being celebrated and honored, but you're going to see the privilege of suffering for me. Oh, that doesn't feel, for us, that's difficult. And yet, as you read all of Paul's writings, he talks about the privilege of laying down his life for him. So what happened? It says that Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days, and immediately he began preaching about Jesus in the synagogue, saying, he is indeed the Son of God. What did he do? He told his life change story. Guys, you're not going to believe what happened. I came here to kill, and Jesus himself showed up and said, stop. You know what else he did? He joined the original dream team. He stepped into the training and the opportunities to use his gifts to point people to Jesus, to grow the family of God. He didn't wait until his reputation had changed. He didn't wait until it was all better, perfect. He understood it all. No, he said yes. He said a purpose-filled no to some of those things so that he could fully step into an impactful yes. And you know what the result was? All who heard him were amazed. Isn't this the same man who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem, they asked? And didn't he come here to arrest them and take them in chains back to the leading priests? People were in awe. Do you know how you have found God's best yes for you? It's when you experience life change. It's why we tell stories here all the time. It's why we ask you to write your stories. Are you experiencing life change in your life? Because your spiritual life will stall when you stop asking, God, what's the next step that you have for me to take? When you start offering back excuse-filled no's, it's going to start to feel like God is really silent, and he's not. He's just already made it clear where he's invited you to take a next step. You're the one that's waiting. So if you're not experiencing life change, ask again, God, what's the step that you want me to take? And the other question is, are you participating in life change? This life-giving movement of people isn't about consumers coming and getting more and getting more and getting more and going wherever I feel the most connected to God. No, you need to look at the people around you and what are they experiencing through you? Are you using your gifts to serve others, to help point them to Jesus? Are you contributing to God's mission today? Is heaven more full because of you, because of what you're bringing to the table? Like, how are you using your life to help people encounter him? I mean, in 100 years, in 200 years, do you know what the only thing that's going to matter is your relationship with God? And the relationship with God that people have around them. And when you begin to clarify your calling and sharpen your no, you step into that. In fact, I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to hear from someone who's a friend of not just our family and our church, but someone who has a unique story in her journey where some no's were said for her and other times she had to say no, but you see how God's using her, using Jenna to make a difference. Let's watch.
So growing up, I was always really involved at church. My family had been going to CedarCreek since I was 5. And so it was always a place where I felt safe and like I belonged. And as a kid, I was always, pretty artistic. And in high school, that was the same. I loved to paint, I loved to draw. And I remember my aunt would, one time I drew something and she came over to me and she was like, Jenna, you have a gift. What are you gonna do with it? I had applied to this school on the West Coast and it was kind of my dream school, a school that I didn't even think that I would be able to get into, and I did. It was like I could see my future in front of me and just getting so excited over that vision. I kind of, ended up realizing financially it was just going to be a better decision for me to stay closer to home and go to school, and in the moment it felt like this huge disappointment to me. It felt like this vision that I could see for the future was kind of falling apart. This piece of identity was a little bit lost. And what I realized through that experience was I was putting so much of my worth and value on this external place, like this place that I would go and have maybe a prestigious title or achieve this certain thing, and that's what was gonna fulfill me. And when that didn't pan out for me, that was a huge lesson that I learned through my first year of college, is like, that's not where my worth and value comes from. It's not this external thing that I have to achieve or get to, but that wherever I am is where I can lean into purpose. Wherever I am is where I can lean into passion. And that's where I felt like my journey with photography really started to unfold. And looking back, I realized that wouldn't have happened. I can confidently say that I wouldn't have been in the position to do all of those things that I've been able to do with photography if I was anywhere but here. And so I can see that, looking back, God really directed my steps and established those steps before me, even when I had such a different plan in mind. When I was in college, I was actually studying to be a math teacher, and that's what I was doing for the 4 years. And simultaneously, I was kind of building, a photography business as my side hustle. And one story I love to reflect on in thinking about, my photography journey is actually that my dad was the one that purchased my first professional camera gear. And I know that piece of my story is privileged, and I feel really lucky to have that. But for me, it's like one of my favorite things to think back on, because it reminds me that, this business is a gift. And it was literally a gift. It was literally a gift to me. But also, I feel like it's a gift that a lot of my skill sets that God's given me that allow me to be, good at photography and be good at maybe running a business, those things are a gift, and my job is to steward them well. And going back to kind of everything even my aunt would say of okay, you have a gift, what are you gonna do with it? That's something I always trace back to, I really feel connected to that idea that, photography has been a gift for me. And then taking it kind of one step further, I can think of a handful of times, 4 or 5 very, very specific instances where, somebody has come to me with something that they're going through in their life, and photography and having some sort of a session would really be a way that they could preserve moments that they know are really going to matter. And I've just been able to feel so aligned with God and being okay, this is part of the reason that you have a business. This is part of the reason that I've given you this gift, is so that you can use it for good in helping other people tell their stories and preserve moments that really matter. When I'm looking back on my journey and where I am right now, I totally can see the ways that God has directed my steps and allowed me to kind of get to this place. But I also know, as I was saying, to be a teacher, I know that I could have fulfilled a lot of my purpose there too. It's not a title, it's not necessarily, a position, it's not a job. For me, honestly, photography in and of itself isn't my purpose, but photography is a way that I get to live out my purpose. And it's kind of one of those things that I'm determined to use as a vessel to live on purpose and to make an impact. in whatever ways that He will allow me to.
I don't know about you. Some of you have to do this every week with me. But when I hear people quite a few years younger than me teaching me, inspiring my faith, I love being a part of a church that isn't just thinking about who's here. We're thinking about how do we raise them up? How do we reach the next generation? So that as long after we have life, this church is still making heaven more full. And so will you put your hands together to tell Jenna thanks for sharing her story, for blessing us. I got a text message from our founding pastor, Lee Powell. I know many of you know him. He says, great talk today. Caused me to think about my own calling and purpose today for the years that I have left. Jenna said something in her story about growing up at CedarCreek, and it made me realize that there are people on staff at the Creek who weren't even born when the Creek launched. It's still surreal. Keep going strong. I mean, when we've got people in Lee's generation going, I want to clarify my calling. If you're not dead, you're not done. I mean, that's what I love about our church. Yes, you're going to experience a few no's. Things aren't always going to go the way that you want. There's these no's that are going to show up in your life uninvited. And you know, at times you're going to have to say no. You're going to have to give a few purpose-filled no's. Like, no, I won't quit even if I can't see. When things change, no, I won't give up. And at times you're going to have to tell society around us no to the things that they say are really important. But trust that a purpose-filled no may not always be easy, but it always leads to a more impactful yes. If God can turn a Christian killer into a key influencer, stop limiting what God may want to do in you. Saul, who became Paul, got to the point through shipwrecks, through nearly dying multiple times, after starting 14 churches, writing 2/3 of the New Testament, most of it while he was imprisoned. At one point, throughout his life, he said no to anything that kept him from his calling. At one point, some of the Christians were like, don't go to the next city because you're going to die. And even when people were trying to protect him, do you know what he said? He said, my life is worth nothing to me unless I use it for finishing the work assigned to me by the Lord Jesus. The work of telling others the good news about the wonderful grace of God. He understood his calling and he gave his life for it, and we're the recipients of that. And he did that because a guy by the name of Ananias, I know it's sad, I'm almost done. I'll let you preach. It's cool. I know, I got young kids, man. It's great. A guy by the name of Ananias mentioned one time, allowed God to use him. Allowing God to use you is bold and it's risky and it's messy and it's not always easy, but that's what an adventure is. It's so rewarding. If I were to bring Ananias out on the stage today, if I were to bring the Apostle Paul out on the stage, they would say, if God can use me, he can use you. I think they would say, I dare you to move. Like, let God pick you up off the floor. Let's go. So will you make that your prayer with me right now? God, thanks. Thanks for every person that's here. And God, thank you for the incredible privilege of being able to use my gifts to partner with your Spirit to help people get spiritual vision. What a privilege. Thank you for the people here who are listening and their hearts are open. God, would you bring clarity to their calling? Would you sharpen a purpose-filled no against anything that's keeping them from that? Would you give us the courage to step into a more impactful yes? And God, in 100 years when we're with you, may we look back and see a city changed because of what you allowed us to be a part of. Thank you for this mission. And continue to inspire us to give our lives to it together in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. Thanks.